Hello and welcome to The Deep Dive. I'm Hannah Mullaney, Client Solutions Director at Saville Assessment, and each episode I'll be joined by an industry expert to discuss the hottest topics in assessment today. Let's dive in. We're bringing you today's episode from our international conference. It is day 3, and on day 1, or day 2, actually. Day two. Our very own R&D director, Rab MacIver, gave a thought-provoking presentation on skills and the pivot to skills that is happening in many, many organizations around the world. And so we thought we'd take the opportunity to continue the conversation here. Rab, thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Hannah.
So question number 1, skills seem to be everywhere at the moment. What's happened? Where have they come from?
Probably 2 main things, I think, when I'm sort of thinking about why they've become so much on the top of everybody's agenda. I think the first thing is that it's come from the understanding that skills are changing. A lot of that, I think, has come from IT and the development of new technologies and understanding that we need to change to be able to adapt to new technology. And that sort of takes into the second point, which is the language that you use when you talk about skill instantly fits with what needs to happen in the world of work today. So if you think about it, you can reskill, you can upskill, people can become de-skilled. We talk about skills-based organizations. The whole language suddenly fits into something that the CEO understands, but also the candidate understands when they're applying for a job. Everyone understands that you might need a skill and that you can develop a skill. It's a simple concept. Now, you can't say, if you think of competencies, you can't think of it like that. You can't de-skill, de-competence, can you? You can't up competence. It's just ridiculous. So people always, I think, struggle with language in that. So I think those are probably 2 of the bigger sort of things apart. And there are a lot of other reasons and a lot of other benefits to skills. But I think those are some of the reasons why I think it's here to stay. I think the skills are not going away.
Absolutely. And what does this mean for assessment? And maybe we can break this into 2 buckets and look at talent acquisition or pre-hire, and then talent development post-hire. So let's start with talent acquisition. What would this look like, recruiting for skills?
Okay, well, I mean, obviously you can attempt to recruit directly for the skill. And sometimes that is what you might want to do. But also, if you think about even doing that, you may be recruiting from a skill that somebody has, and you can check that they've got it. And you could do, for example, a test of coding, let's say, for example, that somebody knows how to use JavaScript or a particular form of data visualization or a particular piece of software. But that, if you think about it, that might stand you in good stead for a year, but that doesn't necessarily tell you that the person will pick up other skills. So if you hire somebody just on the basis of skills, then to do it. Having said that, there's probably some benefit that maybe some things, for example, related to experience, if you just focus on experience, there's a danger that that's even more open to sort of privilege and opportunities that might be given to fewer people and not what you're wanting to do as part of your diversity strategy. So that's the first thing that you could do. Or the other thing that you could then sort of say, well, could I be looking for somebody who has the potential to acquire skills? And if they've got the potential to acquire skills in a broad area or even a narrow area, even like coding or something like that, then you can instantly see that what would happen is that they have not potential for 1 year, 2 years, but for much longer in your organization to be able to fit to something. And therefore, I like the concept of skills potential, the potential to acquire skills as a powerful mechanism when you're hiring somebody.
So that idea of hiring for potential, which I think is also getting quite a lot of airtime at the moment, feels like it's sort of intrinsically linked to this pivot to skills that we're seeing within organisations.
I think it is. I think that's absolutely dead right.
And I wonder whether, and I know that we've talked about this in the past, just to your kind of earlier point on how experience is linked to opportunity, and if you're hiring on experience, your social mobility metrics probably aren't going to be great, particularly at the maybe more junior ends of the organisation. How does the skills potential piece feed into that?
I think you've probably got more of an opportunity. It's not just experience. You always have the sort of concern if somebody's privileged, for example, they could go on some unpaid work to get some experience because they can afford it. Whereas other people that wouldn't have the privilege and the capacity to do something like that wouldn't be able to. So sort of experience and opportunities are often given to people who are in the situation of being nearer the top of the social tree, rather than people who you're trying to lift up in terms of being socially mobile. So, and then if you think of skills probably does that to a lesser extent, because they're probably smaller things to develop sometimes than bigger things like education or a long piece of work experience that you might be looking at. But they're still open to, I guess, some level of opportunity. Because
if you've had the work experience, you'll probably have built some skills off the back of it.
Yeah. Exactly. Or it may be that you can afford the online course on JavaScript coding or whatever it is that you're trying to do. I think the idea then, if you think about skills potential, is that that's not the case. That's nothing to do with your experience.
Yeah.
It's not even your skills you've got now. It's what you could acquire. And therefore what you're saying is, who should I be giving the experience and the opportunities to when I'm hiring them? Yeah. I should be giving them to the people with the most potential, not the people who are most privileged.
Yeah. So it helps really from a DE&I perspective to think about skills potential.
Yes.
And I guess it also starts to solve the problem of scarcity of skills in a number of different areas, and having probably quite a small candidate pool to choose from if you are needing to recruit on the skill itself.
Yeah. I mean, as soon as you've got a scarcity of skills, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
How are you going to get to the point of finding people? Everybody will probably be chasing that skill because it's probably a new skill and a critical skill. And therefore, the cleverer thing to do is to identify people who could quickly acquire that skill. That's people with skills potential, and that can get up to a higher level of mastery in that skill. That means that when they actually develop the skill, they can be brilliant at it. And that's worth the organization's investment. And it's almost a safer strategy, because you can go out to the market and look for scarce skills, but all it is a sort of arms race to chase after a small group of people when a new skill comes in that doesn't really exist.
Yeah. And that's probably quite a nice segue to the development side of things. So if we move away from hiring, from talent acquisition, and we think about developing skills within organizations, and if we think about everything we've talked about around this move kind of, I guess, away from competencies, more focusing on skills, like what does that now look like in a development setting?
Okay, so I mean, maybe it's also useful just to sort of shift to give a different example, maybe move away from where a lot of that skills-based thinking started, which is in the sort of coding space. So let's move more into the sort of management leadership space and thinking what we're doing in that space. Well, the first thing that what you want to be able to do is, if you think of what matters for a particular job role, there's some skills potential that means that you're more likely to be effective when you do something. So, for example, if you've got skills potential on convincing people, then what that means is probably when you come into a new situation, even if you don't know too much about who you're dealing with. You might not even understand too much about the topic, but you probably have quite a lot of skills, even though it's a completely novel situation, to perform quite well in that situation, and that will make you effective. But there's another thing that, of course, that can happen is how do we then develop the person who's already high on convincing people to get to an even greater level of mastery? And then you start to think of, well, what I then want to do is to say, give them some individual skills. And I think they're much more granular than when we were talking about competency and everything, individual, separate things. So for example, we could work on somebody who's high in convincing people and get them really good at some storytelling.
Yeah.
And that storytelling can really engage staff at work. They can really understand through stories what exactly the organisation or the team's trying to do and the difference it will make and how everybody can contribute to it.
Yeah.
All of that can be very powerful. And of course, it can be powerful in an external context or selling. But, but if you take the idea of that, then how do I develop that at work? Now, traditionally, how was that done? Traditionally, people think about that in terms of skills development. They think, well, I can do a formal course. Okay, 10% of the time you've got to take people out of work. It's costly, and both by not having people in work and because you're paying for the course and travel and all of that side of thing. So maybe 10% of development actually gets done like that.
Yeah.
Another 20% is social. So that's more peer-to-peer coaching, mentoring, those sorts of activities where you might get sort of direct input and help from somebody else to help you can do it. You can see how that would help with something like storytelling, although probably it's helpful if the person's good at that, storytelling themselves. But if that's 20%, we've got 10% for formal, 20% from social, we're left with the other 70%. And that's on the job. That's the experience that we're all doing in the everyday.
Yeah.
And if what we can do is help people develop skills, if we can help the manager in that situation to be able to develop the skills on the job and practice the skills and become better at it. And final trick, if we can do that in a way that suits the manager's own personality and style, then suddenly we're helping them understand how to develop themselves by using the resources around them, just in the general flow of the work that they're doing day to day.
And so they're more likely to develop that skill more effectively and probably do it more quickly as well.
Yeah, and you're improving somebody at work in real time.
Yeah. And is there anything in also sort of the value of being able to understand somebody's skills potential? So the example you gave there was where someone had quite high skills potential on convincing people. I guess if you had someone else and they had quite low skills potential on convincing people, you might suggest that they go about developing that skill in a quite a different way. So I guess it's quite valuable to know whether someone's high or low.
Exactly. And it may be sort of hard fought, and maybe there's more of an element of that you should walk before you run in that. And therefore, we know that in skills development that practice is critical.
Yeah.
So then, therefore, you may do more practice where you actually try out the skill, not in a real context, first of all, but you really put it in and then you get feedback and you become better before you actually do it. So you learn and you accept maybe that's just a harder fought thing for you to do, but it still may be critical at times for you to do it.
Yeah.
Maybe not so often, and maybe you shouldn't deploy it as often as somebody who's stronger on it.
Yeah.
But it may be critical for you to be able to pull that rabbit out of the hat sometimes.
And so you're really setting yourself up for success by understanding yourself, A, how you learn best, and B, just the fact that it might be a little bit harder for you to do this thing.
Yeah.
So be gentle on yourself.
Exactly. Have a bit of acceptance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe another question, thinking slightly more broadly. I've seen a lot out there on skills. We've already talked about how it's kind of everywhere. And I'd be quite interested in your views as to what you think of what's out there at the moment, sort of model-wise.
I guess when there's a fast shift towards a sort of different perspective, there's a bit of a danger that things that aren't skills, that things, I would say some of them are competencies in the old language, that broader sets and groupings of behaviours are called skills, and they're not. And some of those, when you look at the definitions, they've got personality, or they're about attitude, or more towards sort of motivational variable, interests even. They're not skills. They're not things that you develop mastery. So I think the test almost is a skill. Each time you look at a skill is, if I practiced that thing, would I get to a higher level of mastery and skill so that it would be much better at it and it'd be more effective? And if I stop doing it, would I likely to deteriorate? And lots of the things are more internal characteristics that probably are more stable. Or traits. They're not skills.
I can't go and practice extroversion.
No, that's a personality characteristic at the end of the day. And then trying to sort of tell somebody that they should change on extroversion might be silly. But you probably can tell somebody how to more confidently approach somebody you haven't met, to be able to hold eye contact and talk about conversation and smile and do all of the things that you might want to do, understanding that it might still be much more difficult for that person to do it, and that recognizing that they may not feel comfortable doing it.
So I guess there's something around the kind of the narrow, like skills are narrower than say competencies, right?
They're narrower and they work, I think, for development, because you can give people little bits and nuggets. You can break it right down as to how you can improve something. You don't just say, oh, go and get a bit more confident, would you? That's just not helpful to anybody. What
do you think would get in the way of skills kind of getting effectively implemented within an organization?
I mean, the number one issue is, obviously, you sort of go back to this, is leadership. Is it working out properly how leaders should be implementing skills? And I think there is something about how leaders are going to have to lead to be effective at developing skills. I mean, I go back to the Centre of Creative Leadership Research 30 years ago showed that developing others and developing self out of, I can't remember, 70 competencies was the lowest. So managers don't know how to do that very easily. Leaders just don't have that easily in the vocabulary. They can't do it for themselves very well, and they can't do it for others. So maybe it's them having a recognition that there is an approach that can help, and it's not always difficult, and you can develop people and individual skills to make them better, and you can reskill and upskill and do things to
so
change
do they
somebody.
need to kind of lead the charge and do it themselves, and then show that they are doing it themselves?
Always the case. But it may be that there are certain leadership characteristics also, and certain that make you more able to do that. There's some skills you need to develop to be able to implement that, and maybe we need to focus on skills to make leaders better developers of people.
We had some questions when you did the presentation yesterday on levels. So one of our favorite ever things, I think, to get when we're working with clients is a beautifully leveled competency framework, which we probably both have quite strong views on. If we're going to be saying goodbye to competencies and we're picking up skills, how do you deal with different levels within the organization? Do you have leveled skill frameworks?
I don't think you should have leveled skill frameworks. I think that's just going to cause a lot of the issues that happen in competencies, and to stop their wider applicability and their usefulness to grind to a shuddering halt. And I think what you can do about that, I mean, I think that a lot of the reason sometimes is that sometimes it's down to like a grading system. So you have a grading system, and your grading system says, you know, this is level 43 and you're a manager, and then you're level 42 and you're a senior manager, and you know, and so everybody's put in a box of a level, and then we need to ascribe for the same competency, we need to say,
Yes.
something like business acumen. Then we say, okay, this is the definition of business acumen at this level, and then this is the business acumen. But you actually look at it, and they're just very similar, and they're not different. And whereas I think with skills, what you're then saying is, what are the skills just necessary for the role? Don't think about level.
Yeah.
Think about the skills relevant to the role. So maybe for the manager, they need to have commercial acumen or understanding. That's a sort of narrower. They maybe don't have to make a judgment. They don't maybe have to make a decision. They don't. So they maybe have to do something that's narrower.
Yeah.
Whereas it may be that when you're actually as a senior manager, there's a different set of skills that you need to be able to understand the commercial information. You may need to, for example, know how to develop a pricing model.
Yeah.
And that's a different skill that you do not need. So then you don't call them the same thing.
Yeah.
And you don't have these frameworks. And if you have an expectation that you set that everybody has to reach a level of skill for a particular role level, that just, I think it will grind us to a shuddering halt, rather than think we can have people who are at quite junior levels having an amazing degree at mastery of something that the CEO doesn't have.
Yes.
And we've got to accept that's going to be the case. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
You're probably a fantastic organization if you've got these little pockets of gold in your organization. And in a way, we should treasure them and reward them.
Yeah, absolutely. So by the nature of skills being narrower, actually, it means you can kind of just do away with leveled frameworks because you're matching skills to roles rather than having to worry about how you make 8 broad competencies fit across every single role within an organization.
Yeah. And I will say praise be.
And on that note, Rab, thank you so much for joining us again on the deep dive. It was an absolute pleasure, as always.
Thanks very much, Anna. Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed today's episode of The Deep Dive. If you have, please remember to like and subscribe to stay tuned for all our latest content. If you want more information on any of the topics you've heard today, check out the show notes for case studies, resources and articles. I've been Hannah Mullaney. See you next time on The Deep Dive.